welcome to Finn Campbell-Notman, who is the current winner 2023 Series 8 of Landscape Artist of the Year. We've just been having a bit of a pre-chat before, so we know that Finn's got his wine, so we should all be good now. But thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and your week in London to have a chat with me, because it's invaluable for other artists to hear straight from you, your experience and how you found the whole experience of going on TV and, you know, getting comfortable with it. So we're gonna have like an ambly chat like I normally do.
Yeah.
Should I call it a ramble and a chat?
Adam Buxton's ramble chat.
Exactly. A ramble chat. But first of all, can you just give us, because I've read all your backstory, but it'd be really nice for anyone who's watching and they're new to this, for you to just give us a brief kind of backstory, because you have a fascinating backstory.
Well, let's see how I can do it in a sort of potted history. From the beginning, let's start. I grew up. So my first memories at all are growing up on an 1890s clinker-built mahogany cruising boat on the Norfolk Broads with my mother and my stepfather, who was in the merchant marine, but he was also just becoming a painter. And so for 4 or 5 years, we moved around the Norfolk Broads, living on this boat. And every morning at about 4 or 5 a.m., he would set off with his easel and his paints, and that's what he would do. And so we lived on this for 4 or 5 years, and he never really gave me direct instruction. But the idea of being a landscape painter is sort of my first example of what an adult would do as a child. Do you see what I mean? So over the course of my life, and I really did sort of follow that path for the most part, and didn't really question it, because that example was so clear to me. And the smell of turpentine and the stretching of canvases and the frustrations, and yes, the poverty, particularly in sort of mid-70s to early 80s in East Anglia on the Broads, which was famously then and to a much lesser extent now, the 70s in Norfolk was as if to grow up between the wars. So there was not a direct motorway. It was quite cut off. It was quite depopulated at that time, and I suppose, very traditional. Yeah. The mills still worked, that sort of stuff. The reed cutters were still there.
Yeah, to grow up in the 1970s in Norfolk. And as you say, was there an art scene? Did they have friends who were artists?
That's a very perfect segue into the next little chapter, which was when so my mother and my stepfather and a group of about 4 or 5 friends took on, for a peppercorn rent, for almost nothing, this place called Ludham Manor in the village of Ludham in Norfolk. And if you look at Google Maps, Ludham Manor is an old manor house set in about 14 acres of woodland, which takes up about a quarter of this village. Now, they paid very, very little, with the proviso that they would restore the building. So one of them was a thatcher, another a printer, the painter. My mother was a weaver and a flower presser. At one time, there was a puppeteer, there was a sculptor. So really those formative years between sort of ages 8 to 12, I would be the annoying child going around helping each of them, helping in inverted commas, but seeing that example, as I said earlier, that that's how one lives life as an artist. It seems still to me very, very natural thing to do. Now, I know that's a very, it's not that it's privileged, because we were very, very poor. It's just, it was my life experience showed me that to be an artist or an artisan was a normal thing. I suppose if you grow up with a family of doctors or what have you, that's a normal thing. So for me, that was the normal thing.
That's like a live foundation course, isn't it?
I suppose it is, yeah. And you know, it was very swallows and Amazons. We had our dinghies and our
Sounds amazing.
We'd explore the woodland and build camps and all that sort of stuff. I do remember my first drawing really that was sort of mine was of a willow warbler, because in that area it's one of the hotspots for birding in the UK. So I'm not a twitcher, but I do know a lot about that sort of stuff. Just because you're on the rivers, you see wildlife, you see nature, you see the seasons.
Yeah, I saw on your website there's quite a few birds.
Yes, yeah. That's sort of. I kind of began that series of work about 6 or 7 years ago, because a family friend asked me to do some, and he was expecting some, I suppose, sort of fairly straightforward, illustrative images of birds. But me being me, I took it a lot further.
Yeah, your style is very surreal, which I absolutely love.
Do you think so?
Yeah. Have you seen the artist Daniel Merriam, who's an American artist?
I don't know the name. No.
You need to look him up. Your work has so much resonance with what he does. And I'll send you afterwards, I'll send you the copy of a link to his website. I think you'd be like, oh, I get it. Yeah. It's just, as soon as I saw that first painting you did in the heat of the river, the water on the sand, I was like, wow. The surrealism is just, yeah.
Well, so yes, through the programs, there were a few sort of words that were used by the judges and the presenters. And it wasn't exactly surrealism, but they said there was something, specifically Kathleen said there was something symbolist about my work. And that I would say is true. I certainly wouldn't call myself a surrealist, but the term that I've sort of come up with is irrealist, because I do paint from life. I do paint from the scene that is there, and I do compose. And so you can go to a place more or less, because every painting is a composition. But you can go to a place and it would be a specific place. It's just that I change certain elements within that painting, which sort of renders it somewhere between actual place and realism, and what I'm thinking about, what I'm feeling, all those sorts of things, which sort of flips it a little bit to make it, I suppose, more charged, more freighted. And I think that's what, when you say surrealist, I think that's what people are picking up on.
Yeah, it's the way you use the color, the way that you apply the brush strokes, and the way the flattening almost. So it goes to almost like an imagination, an imaginary world.
Yeah. Today I was at the After Impressionism exhibition at the National Gallery in London, and one of my notes that I made today was brushwork, because a lot of that stuff from 1890 to 1920, more or less, there is a change from a very smooth surface to a very worked and obviously painterly surface. And that's not something that I do. I spoke to someone about 10 years ago, and I think because
Hang on a minute, we've lost you. We've lost you. We've lost the sound. We're going to have one of those recordings where we keep zipping in and out. I don't know what happened there. The whole thing disappeared.
Don't worry. One of the things that I learned from doing the series is repeating the same piece of
exactly.
And I'm sometimes it was like 10 times that I would have to repeat a piece. So
it's a good job you're resilient, because that was I think the last time that happened to me, where the whole thing just disappeared, was in the middle of lockdown. So that's quite an unusual thing to happen. But you all of a sudden you speeded up. and we
Right.
couldn't hear anything. So yeah, go back to the bit you were saying.
I was about to say that brushwork is one of the things that I took from seeing the after Impressionism show at the National Gallery. I don't tend to use a lot of paint, and that's just simply because how I work as a painter is partly derived as someone who was an illustrator and was known as a draftsman. So there's erasure happening on the painted surface. So I will wipe things back, as I was explaining just now. I was speaking to someone a few years ago, and they were art tutors from Birmingham. And they said, "Well, we know when a painter's doing well because they start using a lot more paint."
It's expensive.
Well, it is. And if I went to see Tai Shan's show at Flowers East a few weeks ago, and I hadn't seen his paintings in real life, and he actually talking to him off camera during the recording of the show, we talked about Frank Auerbach, who, because Tai works in Camden, he's met Frank a few times, and he's got a few tales that he told me about Frank Auerbach. And Frank Auerbach is famously loads the canvas with a lot of very dense,
thick, and you can smell it when you walk into a show.
Absolutely. So I went to see Ty's show, and the brushwork was the thing that really stood out to me. And it was called I want to say Big Faces. No, it was called Headspace. And for me, there's actually a kind of let's say a motif, a thing that I see a lot of, which is big face painting. So it's kind of just shoulders and face. I don't particularly like it, but Ty's show, I was very impressed because they were on a very large scale, and I would say it's a 2-inch brush, the brushworks, loaded with paint, but getting the facets and the tones and the colors, all of it very correct. So when you stand back from paintings, maybe, I don't know, 10 meters or more, it all coalesces into a coherent image. Now that's something when you see a Van Gogh from like 3 or 4, 3 meters in a gallery, it does coalesce. If you look at it closely, it looks like a mess. Now that's something that I probably won't get to doing, just because my painting is more, as I say, derived from draftsmanship rather than the application, the use of sort of structural paint on the surface.
Yeah, that's kind of alludes to your background, doesn't it? So you left, you got as far in the story as living in the kind of commune, the house with all of the artists, and then where did you go from there?
Well, I've got such a varied background. From there, we moved into Norwich city centre, to a place called Argyle Street, which in the very early 80s, it was sort of second only to some of your listeners or viewers might know this, Christiania in Copenhagen. It was basically a whole street of houses, former miners or textile workers' houses, which was basically a squat. And it was the second biggest squatted sort of commune in Europe at the time. And so I spent 2 years there, so, for part of it being homeschool, for part of it going to regular schools. And then maybe go from there down to Glastonbury in the southwest to another sort of artist commune, sort of a setup, and a regular school there, and being friends with the people who ran Glastonbury Festival. So that was quite an alternative upbringing. And in terms of art training, I did my A level, and I'm like Damien Hirst. I got an E at A level because even then I was trying to push things in different directions than a purely academic demonstration. So I got an E.
It's kind of a rite of passage. You have to get an E. I think I got a D, and I've got a master's. So
and then I did a foundation at SCAT, Somerset College of Art and Technology. And during that, we went to Paris. So I was 17, 18, 19, I forget, and had the most wonderful week. Just amazing, amazing week. And actually that fed into the final in Portmeirion, because I was a real fan of The Prisoner. And I actually had the blazer with the piping and the shoes.
Oh, wow.
I kind of had the uniform. And one night we're in the 6th arrondissement of Paris, and I was with a few friends, and we go down back alley, we knock on a door, we go into a club. Turns out it was the club number 6, which is the name, which is the character in The Prisoner. And they see me. I didn't know this. This was completely random. So we walk into this club, which is the sort of Parisian fan club of The Prisoner, and I'm dressed in the. So we get welcomed in, and we have this crazy couple of days. So when the final, when they told me the final was in Portmeirion, and I've been asked this a few times. The little figure that I put into that painting is number 6.
It's your lucky number 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, the lucky number 6.
Yeah. So that's up to foundation, and so from that, I think I'd applied to the Slade at some point prior to doing the foundation, and obviously not developed enough. So my painting tutor at SCAT, a fellow called Malcolm Plasto, says, you should go to Wolverhampton, because he knew the tutor there, and he thought that my style would really suit it. And at that time, my landscapes were a little like De Bruyne. They were kind of very colourful, sort of expressionist paintings. And my figurative stuff was much closer to one of the new Glasgow boys called Stephen Conroy. And I was getting quite a lot of favourable attention for the figurative stuff. So I went to Wolverhampton, and this is the very early 90s, so around 91, and I got into the rave scene.
I was going to say, it was quite around Wolverhampton.
Yeah, but so I'd sort of been around that sort of stuff, as you probably can pick up from my youth, quite alternative.
Yeah.
And really, this is sort of the turn of 1990 to 91. I get to Wolverhampton. I'm painting in the new Glasgow boys sort of idiom, let's say. And that's when the first freeze happens. And really, within a year, painting in any way was sort of just irrelevant. So I dropped out. I restarted at UWE in Bristol. My brother died tragically, and I kind of left fine art behind for a few years and moved to the States and started a record label there. Came back after a few years and decided that I really needed a vocation, and so applied to a few different things, including architecture, and eventually ended up in Falmouth to study illustration. This is late 90s, early 2000, up to 2001, and got a double first.
Wow.
And immediately got an agent, started working professionally, decided I wanted to do something for myself, and so applied to the Royal College of Art, got onto their communication art design course, which was basically an amalgam of what was formerly separate departments, so illustration, graphic design, filmmaking, typography, and a few other things. And it's a 2-year course, and it was a free for all. There was lots of people from different disciplines, and I spent 2 years. I was illustrating professionally to support myself. Of storyboards, illustrations for all the national press, but at the same time, sort of developing different areas of my work. And so my final piece, the masterpiece, as they call it, when you do a master's, was an 18-minute film recording that very same stepfather.
Is that the one that's on your website?
It is.
It's amazing. I watched it earlier. Yeah.
I
Encourage people to watch it. It's profound.
Exactly. So it was a revisitation of re-examining my roots as an artist. It was really, really very valuable to do that, and it's still sort of a touchstone, because just yesterday I went to see a couple about doing a commission for them, and they are sailors. They're based near Norwich, but they have their yacht on the River Orwell and the River Devon in Suffolk. So I went to see those locations, and I was telling them this same story, and I said to them, really, the colors, tones, and atmosphere that seem to work into my paintings without my conscious effort has been instilled from that very, very early example.
Yeah,
the
you
color,
can see that.
tones, yeah. And it's sort of almost like, as you said earlier, when people see my paintings and think they're surreal, I kind of know what they mean. And I think what they mean is that there's a German phrase called seltsame Stimmung, which is an undefinable atmosphere, which is somewhere between day and night. It's sort of crepuscular. It's neither melancholy nor happy, but it exists on this kind of absence and presence at the same time. And that's partly instinctive, but partly because making this film at the RCA, I took a very deep look at what was sort of the building blocks of how I thought about the world, what I found valuable, how I could express myself best.
Isn't that what every artist is trying to get to, their own language that has authenticity, that's completely authentic to them and their own completely unique lived experience? And that's what you're describing, is this unique lived experience that has an outcome of this very unique style of painting.
Yeah, I know, but that
shouldn't have a name, because you should be inventing it. It's your name. It's Finn's style.
Exactly, and that's something that I've paid attention to and allowed to come through, kind of at the expense of having a career up till now. As in, I was illustrating from 2001 until just a couple of years ago. But about 10 years ago, after the financial crash, a lot changed in that world.
Yeah.
It became very difficult to earn the same living that I was earning beforehand. And just in terms of stylistically, what people would commission, the number of publications dropped, the number of commissions dropped, and the price of those commissions also dropped. So at that point, I decided really to focus on my own work. And it's taken about 10 to 12 years of just practicing and making bodies of work and series of work and re-engaging with what's really true to myself. In terms of style, many times people have said, oh, you need to brighten your palette, or oh, you should, there's countless numbers of you should do this. And I've been extremely stubborn and said, no. I hear, but I can't do that if I am to make work of any value.
Yeah, no, authenticity means that you have to do things that make other people feel uncomfortable.
Well, you could call it being stubborn or bloody minded. It's almost as if I didn't make the work that was true to myself, I wouldn't be an artist. I'd do something else. Yeah,
and you'd be a pastiche anyway. You'd just be a pastiche of others. And surely that the ultimate goal is to be genuinely and authentically you. And if people don't recognize it, that's kind of good, because if they don't recognize it, it's because it's new and it's different and it's you.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, my partner, my wife, she's like, why can't you just X, Y, Z?
Oh my God, how many partners and wives do I deal with who go, why can't you?
She's long suffering, and
there aren't many of them, I'm afraid.
Well, I would tell a story that until 2 years ago, I've been working on a very large series of very large charcoal drawings, which were drawn from my background, largely landscape, all landscapes.
And is that with the charcoal that you've been collecting?
Well, so that developed from going back to the most basic materials, just charcoal, just paper, just stripping everything back to the very basics of what to make a depiction is. As that developed, we were in that period 3, 4, 5 years ago when the forest fires worldwide were becoming ever more apparently significant of an impending catastrophe. And I had a light bulb moment where I thought, if I can get charcoal from a forest fire, use that charcoal to depict the location from which the charcoal is from, and then sell that piece, and then buy the land, which is really the only way that you can protect land, then that was a very virtuous circle. And the values that were the values inherent in the artwork resulted in the value of the artwork being sold, and this very virtuous circle. So it took 2 or 3 years to get there. And I did do exactly that. I auctioned on my 50th birthday this big fire piece and bought 16 hectares of Brazilian rainforest through the aegis of a rainforest trust. And for me, that, you know, when we talk about whether art has a connection to real life, or it has a meaning, or does it have worth in society or to the environment, then that for me was a way of getting to that point. And that was sort of a breakthrough.
It's amazing.
And then about, let's say, where are we now? So 2001, I'd done this, and so it's a developing, and it's an ongoing series, and I have a sort of a business plan to expand it to other artists as a model. But I'm working in obscurity in Spain, and I don't have a platform to really make it something larger. So I thought to myself, well, just for a moment, I'm just going to go back to my earliest thing, which is landscape. And I painted a landscape which was very redolent of both the place and a sort of an emotional feeling about that place. And my partner said, "Why are you doing landscape? I don't like landscape." Because she equates it with, you know, a chocolate box sort of scene on the kind of chintzy sort of thing. And really, that's the painting that I entered as submission for Landscape Artist of the Year. Now,
was that the first time you'd ever applied?
Yeah. I'd known about it the year before, and I think I thought about applying, but maybe missed the deadline, or thought, I think I might have. I don't think I entered. I think I looked at it but didn't enter.
And had you seen the program?
I'd seen a few episodes here and there, but I don't have a subscription to Sky or anything like that. And so, so I did this landscape, and it's the first one, oil landscape in a fairly traditional idiom, let's say. I entered it, and I was at the time moving my mother back from Spain to the UK. And as far as I knew, they had regional heats. And so I thought, well, I'm going to be spending a couple of weeks in the UK in that period, and I will hope if I was to get into the program, then I could do something for myself too. And it kind of snowballed. They didn't have a regional heat in the southwest. It was in Blackpool.
Yeah, I remember you being in Blackpool. Yeah, that's not anywhere near to where you live or grew up or anything.
So yes, so the thing is, having now, after a year's process, won the program outright, I could say to my partner, well, you didn't think landscape was anything important, but here's a very good example of following the truth of what you think is important to you as an artist. Because the response to that painting has, I call it now, my lucky charm.
That and number 6.
That and number 6, yeah. So the painting is really quite a simple painting. It's it's the last rays of a light of the evening light hitting a small building. There's a big eucalyptus tree, and there's a sky, and that's it. It's really quite simple.
But it's beautifully rendered, beautifully painted.
Thank you.
And very, very emotional, very emotive.
Well, so yes, if I had advice to anybody painting any subject, whether it's a landscape or a portrait, I have this. I mean, I write around my art as a sort of practice, and that comes from both fine art and studying at the Royal College, and just as a sort of a thing that I like to do. I mean, I read a lot, I study a lot, but I write about the series or write about the each and every piece. And a lot of sort of professional advice from galleries and curators is not to do that, because it's their job to do that. It's really it's your job to do the painting. But I think I did an interview for Cass Art, sponsors of the program. I said within that interview, I said, well, I write around the work because writing about it gives me a slight distance from it, where I'm looking back at the work and really unpacking what I'm doing within that work. And one of the key things that I've always said is that, you know, as an artist, we are unique individual lenses through which the rest of the world, the universe, whatever, is focused. And the tip of our, you know, our fingers are the tip of our brushes is where that is translated and refined and focused. And it should be also from us. So we have our unique lens, and that includes our emotions, our backstory, all of those sorts of things. Pay attention to that. I see a lot of particularly realist painting, which feels very soulless because it's based on the application of a technique. Do you see what I mean?
So I do. I was processing that because immediately you said that several you know, quite hyper realist artists who I know quite well came into my mind immediately, and conversations that I've had with them, and I've said hyper realism is okay if it's got a heart and a soul. So if you're doing hyper realism of something that really is integral to you, it's about your culture, it's about your you've formulated the image that you're then going to render on the page. If it's simply a copy of something, for me it doesn't hold any value.
For me, it's null and void.
Yeah, but if it is got culture embedded in it, and you know, so I'm thinking of one particular artist who has a Bengali culture, and he was doing just copies of things, and I said, you know, this is great, you're obviously skilled and talented, but you don't have, there's nothing in this for me. I can't get in there.
No, and
you go into your Bengali culture, and he started doing that, and their images are amazing now. Yeah,
well, it's a really fine line with realism of any kind, and I wouldn't call myself a realist for this reason. As I was explaining to these collectors yesterday, each and every landscape I make is never a single view from a single place at a single time of day. It is a composition, and there's a lot that happens before that painting is painted, and that involves sketching, that involves Photoshop, that involves just moving things around, and then the actual technique that I use. I'm not particularly I'm not a painterly painter in terms of technique, because it's not for me about the application of paint. It's about imbuing the whole piece with a sort of musicality, that it has to be harmonic. Now, it might look as if, like Prospect Cottage painting, that's a good example, but it's essentially going down to Dungeness. On the way down there, the producers say, well, there's three of you, we're going to allocate each of you a different part of Dungeness. And I'm in the vehicle, and I'm thinking to myself, I really hope they don't give me Prospect Cottage. But it is already so iconic and it's a cottage. How can that be? How can I work with that? I would much rather the sound mirrors that are there, because they have a sort of a different quality, and they're not chocolate boxy. Prospect Cottage is a cottage with a garden, the quintessence of a chocolate box lid. And so
your wife would be horrified.
well, quite. So in the car on the way down, they say, Finn, we're taking you to Prospect Cottage, and I go, okay. So on that morning, we do a few pieces of walking around, and I get to Prospect Cottage, and we're actually not allowed to film on the property itself. And so I can't walk it around it in 360 degrees. I just have this frontal view of it. And it's on a road, and there's motorcycles and cars, and so I really have one view of it. And so the finished painting from that set of parameters, I said to, I don't think it was in the film, but I said to them, well, okay, if I have to do Prospect Cottage, then I have to make it the painting of Prospect Cottage. Okay, how does that happen? How that happens is, well, in the painting that I did, the landscape, the lighthouse that's actually there is way off to the left, but I moved it and I put it all the way over to the right. There was a power line which did lead from top left to bottom right in my sketch that I did, but in the painting I take that out and I put a cloud form that creates that line of composition. So I've moved the lighthouse from one side of the painting to the other, or rather one side of the actual place to the other, taken out the power line, and there's a little white building over here, and the chimney pots on Prospect Cottage are actually terracotta, not white. And so moving these things around, it's kind of like composing a piece of music. If you have something in the wrong place, of the wrong color or the wrong shape, it doesn't harmonize with the rest. So actually, when we talk about composition, which is something I think, if I watched, as I watched the series, I found a lot of people not thinking about composition. For me, that's one of the absolute touchstones and basics of any kind of image making, is to make something that reads and hangs together nicely. Now,
I think that's something that I picked up when they're walking around between the pods and they're chatting, and you see them chatting off camera, off away as well, is that they don't necessarily want painting of what's in front of you. They do want something that is composed, and that's what they're actively looking for. That definitely comes across.
I would say it's one of the fundamental things of any kind of image making, including sculpture, is to arrange things in such a way that it holds together in either a harmonic way or a discordant way. So you can work it both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for my purposes in that painting, I changed the terracotta chimney pots to white because the old telegraph pole's top was white, and there was a building here that was white. And so there is a sort of keynotes that carry on through the painting. I also moved the cottage to the left, and actually the compositional drive is towards the lighthouse. So it's there and it's very clear, the cottage, but it's not actually the crux of the composition. The crux is this journey into the distance, which tells you about the unique landscape. So the cottage becomes both motif but incidental. So it's like the bass notes in a composition. It's
and you did the same, didn't you, when you were in Blackpool?
I did, yeah. Yeah, that was, the Blackpool one was a consequence of having arrived the night before and noticing that the tide was out at whatever time it was out, checking the tide times because I liked the pools, getting up in the morning, knowing the tide times, knowing the pools would be there, and sort of very, very quickly saying to myself, there's really not much here because it's flat grey, flat light, with the pier over here, and the way the pods were facing that was kind of a singular view. And behind us, all sorts of stuff. But I could sort of tell they wanted a seascape or a beachside sort of a scene. And I really thought to myself very, very quickly, what makes a nice composition? There's not a lot of rhythm happening here, apart from these pools of water in sand. I would say
you
this.
have a lot of time when they say, right, you've got your heat in Blackpool. Was there a lot of time between them telling you that and you actually doing the heat?
Let me think. What they said was the heat is in Blackpool. They didn't give you the exact location.
Right.
A few days before, they tell you to arrive at a certain time, at a certain location.
So a few days.
Yeah, a few days. These days, I think it's hard for them to keep the view a secret because of Google Maps. I mean,
yeah, and they've got to put those pods up.
They have to put pods up. Oh, but so it's not a cheat because they will tell you the location. And so, for example, Thames Barrier, there's only a few locations where the pods could be. So you kind of have an idea what you might be, but what you won't know are the conditions, and you won't know the lighting, the clouds, and of course we start very, very early in the day, and we start sort of 6:37 through to about 6 o'clock, and so the duration of actually the painting period is sort of extended through those hours, and of course things change immeasurably during that time. The singular piece of advice that I would say, which is something I did, was decide on what you're going to do in terms of the composition. Yes, be alive to the changes that might happen, but don't start moving things around within the composition. Pay attention to the change of the light. So, for example, the Thames Barrier is a good one that I quickly decided what elements, what I said in the program, the bones of the picture, they don't move. The only thing that changes is the lighting effect upon them. And occasionally the incidental thing which may happen, which you can include, which might change things.
Yeah, like your boat.
The boat. And actually, one of the judges said to me, just after the boat had come across, I put it in because I had this yellow spar of one of the barriers, and the Thames lighter came across with a red sail rolled up, and it was exactly the same angle, which just pulled the composition together. It wasn't that I wanted to put a boat in it. It was more about, as I said, composition element. But one of the judges said, "Oh, we don't like boats."
I do remember. Damn.
They said, "You're very brave to put a boat in because we don't like boats." I was like, really? Why not? But so that gives a good example of having a structure of a painting within this context of the program, just sticking with that structure and paying attention to the changing conditions and allowing for the incidental. Incidental not adding to it's sort of like a grace note, if you like. You might see a bird, or you might see this boat coming through, and it might be a cloud, but not changing the composition. Just being very clear that, okay, here we have a view. What from this makes a good composition? Sketch that, start to paint that, and the rest sort of follows from that.
Yeah, and you can add in the odd, as you say, grace note if it pops up. As like music, as you say, it's very musical approach to.
That sounds a very structured way of going about it, but specifically in that context, I felt I had to. Otherwise, you can very quickly get quite lost, I suppose.
Yeah, I should think it can be quite stressful. I presume they take you off the pod quite frequently for eating and drinking and. Like,
Yeah, there's a few breaks, and I would say actually the painting period probably is much less than 4 hours in total, just in terms of you know, I'm just trying to remember. Yes, so the three judges, each of them at different times they will have a chat, and the two presenters too, and that can happen any time throughout that day. And they may only use one little line of it, or they may use any of it. But you have to, you're sort of continuing working, but you're also answering questions about what you're doing while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Which can be a real distraction.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, it's quite instinctive, the painting and the mixing.
Absolutely.
It's a very focused activity. And I would say, again, the main piece of advice I would say to people is, however you can, exclude the noise, all the cameras, the presenters. You've painted for some time, so you know what you're doing with the painting. Focus on that, because that's why you're there. Just do that. If you can do that and let the rest sort of wash over you and not worry about it, then despite everything, you hopefully will. And I think a lot of people, and most of the people that I encountered through the heats and the final, that's what everyone did. And in particular, the final in Portmeirion, we for various reasons, we all had quite difficult journeys there. Lack of sleep, heat wave, train strikes, all of that sort of stuff, family disasters, and we were all kind of we didn't know that it was open to the public. It was open to the public as well. So we had the crowd around us with a sort of, you could hear, if you tuned into it, oh, he's going to mess that bit up, or he's done that wrong. And you have this comment.
Bad enough that you have the artist critical voice in your head. Now you've got it outside of your head.
Exactly. So you've got this kind of live commentary from the audience, as it were. It was a very difficult day for all of us, but
you all did amazing work. I mean, it was
wow,
all the pieces were amazing.
Well, I would say here's a distinction that I think is quite an instructive thing to think about for anyone who makes images in any way, shape, or form. Is it a good image, or is it a good painting? A good image is something that, irrespective of the execution, holds together as an image. And I would say that the paintings that I made during are quite good.
The dog has a comment. The dog is commenting.
Well, he agrees.
He agreed with you, yeah.
So there is a difference between a good image and a good painting. So a good image is a well-constructed piece, and the execution of it is competent, and that's what I think I did with those filmed pieces. A good painting is, well, I don't like to use the word skillful. It's just a well executed. So you've got the bones of the picture, or it's a good image. A good painting is when all of the execution is really well done. Now, that's very difficult to do unless you are practiced in doing quick plein air paintings.
Absolutely. I mean, 4 hours is just not enough, is it? But you can get the intimation of talent.
Some people are very, very good at that sort of, I don't want to call it speed paintings, it's not that. It's just that that's how they work. So certainly this series, I could see that there were painters who were quite well versed in that. And perhaps what was lacking, I don't know, I'm just sort of surmising here, that the imagery wasn't particularly strong. So they tended towards their sort of practice technique, good painting, but perhaps less of a good image in terms of what the story was, what it's thinking about, and what the person is connecting with in terms of what is in front of them, a backstory, all that sort of extraneous stuff, which I think is equally important.
Yeah, it's deep, isn't it? It's deep, and when you can see that in a piece, even if it's unfinished, because that's what I'm always really impressed with, those people who stick to their guns and they don't finish. They don't finish because they can't finish, but they give you enough that you see there's the bones of something really amazing coming through there. And I think at times when you were painting, there were some where I thought, he's never going to finish this in time, especially the one in the final, because you did take some time before you actually got really into it.
Yeah, I must admit, as I say, it's not a great painting. It's quite a redolent image, but it's definitely not a good painting.
What about your commissioned piece? How did you feel about that? Talk to us about that, because you were saying you went across to Holland.
Well, yeah. So the commissioned piece the winner's film about the making of that. Well, we go to Holland. The brief is very open. There's really not a specific brief from the Queen's house. So it's sort of left up to me to interpret what they would like. Now, having been an illustrator, this is definitely what helped me. That I'm used to. Well, there's twin poles. There's a very tight brief which you have to adhere to, and you can never satisfy because it's an image in somebody else's head. You can't satisfy that. The other end of the spectrum is the completely loose brief, where they don't know what they want. They will only know what they want when they either see it or don't see it when you've done it.
Yeah, scary.
Those are twin poles of commissioned work. And as I said, with a lot of experience of being an illustrator, I sort of can read what they are talking about. In this case, I found it very difficult because essentially the Van der Velde's exhibition at the Queen's House is these quintessential inventors and masters of maritime painting, battle scenes, and very dramatic, very accurate, and that sort of stuff. We go to Holland. Most of those paintings, it's choppy seas, it's battles, it's stormy, it's dramatic. We get to Holland, dead calm, heat wave, no clouds. There's nothing for me to work with. There's literally nothing for me to work with.
And have you been to Holland before? Did you have any experience of Holland prior to this?
Yeah, I've been there many times, many times. And I think for me, going back to that very early part of this conversation, the backstory, North Norfolk and North Holland, same climate, same climatic conditions, flat land, punctuated by spires and trees, dramatic lighting effects on the water and the sky. So the material that I gathered there, if I was to answer the brief of a work inspired by the life and work of the Van der Veldes, then yes, it was very informative, but in terms of making that picture, not particularly informative. So luckily I had the use of a studio in North Devon, not far from the coast, but not on the coast, and on a ridge. So the Atlantic clouds were coming towards me all day, every day. So I had this resource right there, these amazing lighting effects. So the making of the piece then became, rather than recording of a place in Holland specific to the story of the Van der Veldes, it became what I thought the crux of that painting for me was the sense of exile that I have, and they had to leave Holland in 1672. They were basically exiled. So the painting became about my sense of being removed from the places I talked about earlier, from the Broads, from Ludham Manor, and then subsequently my life to the United States and later to Spain. That sense of looking back to the place that you're from, that became sort of the underlying, that was really the subject of the painting, because they had to leave Holland. And so I wanted to somehow convey that sense. So the whole painting is a set of paradoxes. So we have the storm clouds, they're passing. We have very calm water. We have a very close shoreline, but we also have the far distance. So there's there's light and dark, there's near and far. There's also present and past. And the calm and the storm, present day. And so I wanted to really make it timeless. So the big question is, where's the bloody boat? And how I started that painting, and it's essentially crepuscular rays, so sun rays. They form the sails of a ship. The island, or the spit of land, is the hull. And actually, what the admiral of the Dutch fleet told me on the IJsselmeer is, we have two types of people in Holland. One, they're very insular, they look interior. And most of us look to the horizon and wonder what's over there. So that's the first concept. Second concept is, every sailing vessel becomes a society in and of itself, like an island. So the island that I put in there and those sun rays, they are the ship. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, 100% makes sense to me.
Yeah,
it's got that kind, as you say, you're looking back. It's nostalgic, but it's not nostalgic. It's amazing. Yeah.
So the house on the island is actually Ludham Manor, where I grew up. I cheated it in because it does resemble in real life. I'm not sure if it does now. It does resemble a gable-ended Dutch brick-built Flemish style of building. So I'm looking from this current shore back through that past, and then on the horizon line you see a little vessel, and that's them sailing to the future. So there is that kind of teleology of temporality. So it feels like we're in a specific moment, but it's all sorts of things happening, past and future, calm and storm, near and far. And then so organizing all of that into a coherent painting, that was the real trick.
Yeah, so storytelling.
Yeah, and a narrative is something which I think it's quite instinctive. So
you were saying you write a lot.
I do, but I'm not writing stories. I'm sort of, it's more, what do I write? I write about, I suppose it's sort of pictorial theory, let's say. That's something I'm very interested in, is how a picture, here's a reference for you, and for your audience. There's a German art critic and writer called Hans Belting. Now, it's very dense texts that he writes, but one of the things that I've taken from his writing is a very key concept of the aura of a painting.
Yeah.
What he's talking about what he's talking about is the sort of presence that a painting can have, whereby, well, the cliche is that the viewer completes the picture. That's sort of part of it, but what he's saying is that an artwork takes that into account, but has sort of built into it an acknowledgement of that, so that it opens it up for a much wider audience. Now, if you can do that as an artist, that you know that a painting has this presence within it, this, in inverted commas, aura, that goes back to the very earliest depictions that humans have made, whether that be a cave painting or icons, Russian icons. We're trying to encode a great deal of information into something which will speak for all of those things, hopefully in a very cogent and straightforward way that is open to the maximum number of people. that's what I think the aura of a picture is. So,
which speaks back to what you were saying about you feel the symbolism in your work, which was what you said right at the beginning about the symbolism.
There you go, exactly that. And I think that is, so I understand all of this thinking, and I try to build that in. And when someone says it feels very surreal or symbolic, I kind of know that I've achieved what I intended to do, because I know that it's speaking to the viewer of more than what is depicted.
Yeah.
So I suppose my artistic concerns are not, as I said about someone like all the brushwork that I saw today, and it's about the application of, as Maurice Denis said, a painting is a two-dimensional surface organized in shapes and colors with brushstrokes. It's an object. I'm sort of I kind of go back a bit historically, whereby an image and a painting hopefully has all of those things working at the same time. I admire great technique into, a Whistler or definitely a Sargent, not so much Van Gogh, but painterly painting. Totally understand why that is so cherished. But at the same time, you look at a lot of impressionist or post-impressionist paintings. Gauguin, technique, not a great painter, really not. I mean, really quite crude. A lot of these incredibly valuable 50 million, 100 million pound paintings, technically, as a painter, you look at them, and as an artist, we always go into a gallery. We kind of look at it.
I'm there with how close can I get up and look at the marks?
How is that applied? What have they done there?
Exactly. And sometimes I'm told, move back.
And very frequently, I think, my God, that's crude, or that's really clumsy, or whatever.
You go to see the Cézanne at the Tate. I thought exactly that at the Cézanne.
But I have to, yeah, go on.
The Cézanne, crudely painted, but it has the aura. So that's the thing, isn't it? It's like you say, for me, it had the aura.
Yeah.
It didn't have the technique.
Yes, I would say Cézanne. This is interesting. When I was doing my foundation, and I was painting quite colourful sort of Debrucker or sort of expressionist landscapes, I was applying the paint, and at one point I was applying the paint in quite regular sort of directional brushstrokes. And
Cézanne,
he said, no, too slick, too methodical, too programmatic. And I didn't really understand at that time what he meant. Now I very much do. And now I very much don't think Cézanne is amazing. I just don't see it. I can see how he is revered in terms of how it led to Cubism and the breaking down of the pictorial plane into planes programmatically. But I think that's an art historical rather than, and as an artist, I can see that as an art historical jump from Barbizon and French academic painting through sort of the Impressionist, and then you get to Cézanne, where things are starting to break down. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I look at the Cézanne and I just I don't find it skillful, I don't find it mesmerizing, and I don't find it particularly soulful, because I think he is quite an intellectual painter, and I think that's what people responded during that time too.
He's very revered by his contemporaries, and he was bought by his contemporaries, which was quite unusual. They collected his contemporaries, collected Cézanne, and I wonder whether that was because they wanted to, as you say, from a very academic perspective, study him. And I don't think he was. I agree with you. I don't think when you look at it, the repetitive mark making, a lot of it's not right, a lot of it's not skillful, but there is something about it, and maybe, as you say, it's because of its historical moment in time.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for that, isn't there? About being at a particular moment in time.
Yeah. Well, so having lived in Barcelona for a long time, there are painters in the in this exhibition. I forget the name of the room. I think it's Barcelona.
But you know, we're going to be struck off for saying Cézanne wasn't skillful. God dear.
But I don't care.
I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
Here's a pull quote for you. I think I've always thought of Picasso is a hack.
Yeah.
But for this reason, he jumps around styles. He never really masters any of them. He's just a grab bag of stuff, and I think he always continued to be a grab bag of stuff. And I think really clumsy. I don't think. Yeah, it's weird. I
think Picasso was a master marketeer. Absolute master marketeer.
Yeah. Well, so everything is a matter of taste, of course, but just in terms of actually being a practicing painter and what we've talked about during this conversation, how a picture is put together, where it's drawn from, whether it's a good image or a good painting, all of those sorts of things, they all combine to, when I go to an exhibition, sometimes I'll go and see something like what's the name? What's the game? There's a Chilean painter called what's his name? First name, second name, Lorca, but he's represented by the Halcyon Gallery on Bond Street.
So okay. So I was thinking Ernesto Cavaneros, you were thinking of, which is Halcyon. No. If you saw his work, you'd really love it. And he's Spanish, obviously.
There are painters that I just have such facility with paint. Rather like a sort of a contemporary or contemporary era Sargent, who is usually held up, or Anders Zorn as the epitome of someone who had absolute facility with paint and making images. And yet, this particular Chilean painter, he's sort of, I suppose, a magic realism painter. There's animals, it's kind of semi-romantic, but just really facile with the paint, and ultimately kind of look at it and go, again, there's something that's not fully, truly true about this. And so you can have the most technically or the most developed painter in the world, but he can leave you cold. And so for me, I think the artists that I really respond to, and I think, and that, again, that's just a personal connection, I suppose. It's a whole different panoply of it's paint artists that really grab you by the lapels or by the heart or whatever else and make you feel what they feel. And whether they're clumsy or crude or whether they're technically great, it doesn't really matter.
No, if they make you feel something in here.
Yeah, and I think certainly those sorts of, someone like a Basquiat, I think part of the reason he sort of cut through so clearly at that period in the early 80s, because it was absolutely unfiltered truth.
It's visceral.
Yeah. And for that, he's, sort of one of the most revered painters of the last 40 or 50 years.
Who do you collect? Do you collect art?
I wish I had the money.
You soon might.
Well, maybe. But if I did, who would I buy?
Yeah, who would you buy?
Well, there's one artist in particular that I think who does all the things we've just talked about. That really, I can see his historical references. I think he is technically great, but in terms of the connection that I feel to his pictures, is an artist from Cadiz in southern Spain called Jose Maria Diez, Diez. He works in oil, but mostly really quite small scale in just pencil, and they are sort of, I suppose, stylistically, possibly you would someone that I think he's a little bit like is Max Klinger
Mm.
in terms of they are somewhat um, not surreal, but yeah, they have that kind of the thing that we were talking about my work, and this is why I think they're very good, I suppose, is I can see that connection, that this symbolic, because
They recognise it.
it's just trees and rivers and sky, but there's something magical happening in them. And we've been in contact, and if I can afford it, I will certainly buy one of his works, because I just think they're wonderful.
Yeah, I am a collector. I love buying art, and I love being with people who buy art, and I love helping other people choose art, and seeing how it changes their life, and how just being around art changes people's perspective on the world. And you know, I think that everything within this context gives people another dimension, takes them out of themselves, stops them, you know, from dwelling on the worry, and you know, it's a little bit of unreality sometimes, and it's really healthy.
Exactly what you said. Any kind, all art forms, whether it be a book or a film, a piece of music, a painting, architecture too, something which almost like it almost it feels like as if the world has paused. You have the world has paused, and you have paused in sync, and you have this connection to this piece, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And experience within a place in architecture. This is all of this is what culture attempts to do in recompense for our loss of connection to nature. That's one of my key themes in my work. That I try to make that connection, that particularly in urban Western society, that connection that we have to nature, that sense of stillness, and that's one of my key things in my work. Is I try to make something which is stilled, poised, held in equilibrium. That you held.
Japan?
Hmm?
Spent time in Japan?
I haven't, no.
Or forest bathing, it would be perfect. You'd love. You need to get out there.
To a certain extent, my paintings are kind of forest bathing.
They are, exactly. It immediately came in my brain. I was like, forest bathing.
Slow down. Just let the thing happen to, not happen to you, but happen with you.
Yeah, wash over you.
Well, happen with you.
Yeah,
so that
make you feel calmer, and it's a wellness thing, isn't it? I mean, they say that creativity is therapeutic, and that's something I think we need to understand a bit more about. It can be very stressful as well, depending on where you are within the story.
Well, I would say this, that, you know, the idea that being creative is therapeutic. Yes, it is, of course. Certainly for me, when I'm painting, and I've just finished 2 weeks ago really quite a big painting, which summarized 20 years of my experience of a particular place. It took me 2 months to make. There were periods during the making of that painting where you just, you know, you're angry with the thing, because you're trying to organize. You go through all sorts of emotions. You're angry with it, you're happy with it, you hate it and you want to stop it, and then you work through it all. So in that sense, the idea that something that is, so it's more of a catharsis that involves lots of emotions other than being simply calm or meditative. A piece of art can be therapeutic when it absolutely disgusts you or shocks you. All of those emotions are equally valuable, and the same goes for the making of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that I can't remember the structure of that phrase, but it's that thing about being an enigma within a thing, isn't it? It's like, you know, that's what being an artist is. You are just like a whole convolution of these various aspects, and it just depends how it comes out on a particular day or in a
think you probably have picked up from this that I, possibly overly intellectual about it, but I do think about every aspect of it and what the result of all of that thinking and all that practice and technique and all of that sort of stuff. It's not that I see a thing, I'm inspired, replicate that thing. There's so much more to it. There's so much more richness to it. And I think when people really do respond to my work, they see and feel and respond to that richness. And, that's kind of a different thing to, as I say, just responding to technique or whether something is a good image or it's shocking or disturbing or whatever it is. That for me, painting especially has to be really considered to be composed, and then you have a document of all of those experiences that exist on a canvas and can be unpacked by the viewer over the course of time.
Yeah. And reinterpreted and interpreted by them at different moments in their lives when they're looking from different perspectives.
Absolutely. And as you probably well know, if you go to, especially the big national institutional galleries, you go to them time after time, you will revisit certain paintings and they will unveil themselves sometimes piece by piece over time. You will see different things within them.
Yeah, actually, you were saying this at the beginning about lens. You look through a lens and a gaze, and I think a maturity of gaze as well. When you've been looking at art for many years, you get a maturity of gaze. And I remember when I was very young, seeing some Caravaggios, and really they didn't nothing at all. But when I went back and saw them as an adult, it was a profound, almost I don't know, it was a shocking response to them. I was like so drawn in, and I just sat there for hours just looking at them. The same with when I went to the Tate and I saw the Mondrians and the really big, when they were massive, and I had no concept of the size. And when you're a small child, obviously everything's out of scale, so you're used to it. But when you're an adult, you revisit these things in a different moment. So yeah, it's how your gaze matures really, and then how you re-see things, and you bring with it all of that dialogue that you've accumulated in your life as well.
Absolutely. So here's an example. Today I'm in the National Gallery. I've come out of the after Impressionism exhibition. I'm in a room with some very large Van Ruysdaels and sort of Dutch quintessential landscape painting. There's a fella there who's replicating a Van der Velde painting, which for me is quite interesting because I've just done this thing in response to Van der Velde. So here's an artist who's got his little stool out and he's drawing and he's replicating this thing. He's looking at that. I'm looking with my experience at the same painting. There are 3 or 4 Chinese Asian teenagers doing selfies. So they're doing that. There's also a group of, I would say, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years old. They're looking at an Albert kite on the opposite wall with one of the staff who's asking them questions and telling them what they may be looking at and describing the thing. So we have all of these people in the same room looking at the same works of art in a completely different way. Hey, Chloe.
Family's arrived home. We're on the move. We're on the move.
Doing the interview.
Move in here. Move into another room.
Okay. So
I know how fascinating is that, and I love the idea of you having just painted this amazing painting, and then there's these Chinese tourists doing selfies. It's just, but that's all of it has value, and all of it is relevant within the context of what we're gathering, isn't it? And in order to interpret.
Exactly. So And there were other people in the room, but there were sort of five. I was thinking about it as I was looking at the painting. I was thinking, well, each of these people, each of these groups of people, are getting something completely different. The artist is examining how the painting is put together and he's learning from it. The group of school kids are being sort of instructed, and they're kind of wide-eyed, and the tutor is asking them, what time of day is it? Where are we? What are these animals? What are they doing? The sort of tourists are taking a background for their social media audience.
Yeah. Their grand tour, their record of their grand tour.
It's exactly that. It's exactly that. So it sort of illustrates my point that as an artist, we try to make work which communicates to the greatest number of people. We're not trying, I think it's a mistake to try and specifically target an audience as an artist. This is something which people have told me to try to do. Get a style, get an audience, make the style for that audience. And that's just this misunderstanding of what art is.
It just seems to be a route to misery, if you ask me.
You're making a rod for your own back if you do that, I think.
I think there's a place for that. I think there is, and you filled that place by doing illustration. As you said, you had to pay for yourself, and so you went down that route of illustration. And everyone has to think about how they're going to pay their bills, etc. And some people will decide that their art is your illustration, and maybe something else is their passion.
Yeah.
For you, the art is the passion, and the illustration was the business. For some people, and that's and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, this is absolutely.
Art will be their business, and the passion will be something else. That's not what we're exploring right now.
No.
That's a whole nother conversation. We have actually now been chatting for an hour and a half.
I do tend to go on a bit.
And I think I could probably carry on chatting to you for probably another hour and a half. It's been absolutely fascinating. I think the insight that you've given into yourself and the process, and your experience on landscape artists. There's too many of the artists, the landscape artists, has been invaluable. And I think that'd be really helpful. What I'd really like to do is say thank you so much for being so generous and sharing your thoughts so readily. And obviously, both of us are going to be strung up for criticising Cézanne now. So let's call this one a night and say thank you everyone for listening, and then let's do a follow-up, because I think there's so much more to talk about. This conversation needs to go on into other areas, but I think for this one, I think an hour and a half is long enough for anyone to listen to.
Plenty.
So we will say goodbye and good night to everybody, and watch out for the follow-up conversation.
As they say in The Prisoner, be seeing you.
Be seeing you. Number 6.
Yeah.